Everyone, my name is Annie Swerzak with Redmond Mag, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. The topic of today's webcast is Top Tips for Active Directory Modernization, sponsored by Semperis. Purpose-built for securing Active Directory, Semperis delivers first-of-its-kind solutions to address the entire lifecycle of a directory attack. From finding and fixing security vulnerabilities, intercepting privilege escalation and persistence, and quickly responding to ransomware and other data integrity emergencies. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping details. We will have a Q&A session at the end of today's event, so please type any questions you have in the Q&A box on your screen. And Semperis has provided us with great resources on the right-hand side of your screen, so please take a moment to check those out as well. And today's webcast is being recorded, so keep an eye out for a link in your email to rewatch the presentation or share with a colleague. And now I'd like to introduce you to our speaker. Today, we have the pleasure of hearing from Doug Davis, Senior Solutions Architect at Semperis. We are in for a great event, and with that, Doug, please take it away.
Great, thank you, Annie, and really great to be with everybody today. Hopefully you find this session informative, and as said, we can go into a little bit of a Q&A at the end of it as well. Just a short little bit about me. Been in the Active Directory space since the very beginning, and it's still surprising to me that here 23 years later, we're still talking about it at the forefront of identity and at the forefront of cyber resiliency as well. So today we're going to go through a number of topics. We're going to go through why modernize Active Directory. So let's be quite clear, Active Directory is still very much the design that it was back in the early 2000s, and it's not going away. And if anything, it's actually becoming more important in today's world than it ever has before. So why should we modernize Active Directory? What does modernization entail? So what do we mean by modernization? And what are some of the challenges that come when we try to modernize an Active Directory environment? And then considering those three topics, how do we streamline this modernization process and probably get Active Directory into a state where it can continue to support the vast majority of enterprises and businesses and organizations for the next 10, 20 years. Who knows how long it'll be around, but it's definitely been around and still a proactive part of the identity challenge 23 years after its initial release. So a couple of questions on modernizing Active Directory. The very first thing to understand, and this will be a common theme throughout this, is that in today's world, Active Directory is still the entry point to the identity. So the identity is actually what everybody uses to identify themselves to their network. And if that goes down, the business, the business continuity of that organization is compromised. So while everybody understands that I log into Active Directory, my Active Directory is how I typically connect to an environment, it is often overlooked from a security perspective, even though it is a very easy to understand what the vulnerabilities are from the system. And if it gets breached, it gives me almost unfeathered access into the entire environment of the organization, even beyond Active Directory. This makes Active Directory by far the most prominent high-value target for threat actors, and these folks are very well organized. They understand the vulnerabilities of Active Directory, and they're anticipating that you've also overlooked the security of Active Directory. So considering that Active Directory is at the forefront of that challenge, why has it become more and more prevalent in the last little while? And this is because we've extended Active Directory into the cloud. So even though we are using tools like Entra ID, Okta, Salesforce Box, name your internal cloud service that you're using, it is most likely connected through single sign-on to the Active Directory identity as well. which means that everything that I've recently extended Active Directory to in the last 5 years or so is now has a gateway through Active Directory itself. And when we ask people outside of the security context on how important Active Directory is to the mission criticality of an organization, the vast majority, 97%, that's an unreal number, 23 years after Active Directory has been rolled out, are still using Active Directory as a mission critical identity store. And 57% realize that an Active Directory outage would have severe or catastrophic impact. And use your case study of really any Active Directory breach in the last 5 years, you will see that the result of those breaches have indeed been severe or catastrophic. And this zero trust model that we've gone to, so one of the things that we all kind of rushed into is this concept of zero trust, where we kind of make sure that nobody has access unless they absolutely need to, but it means that it assumes that the identity store is now a hybrid identity store and requires that lateral move into the cloud for access just as much as it does Active Directory. So we boil that all down. For 90% of enterprises today, security starts with Active Directory, but in most cases, in a lot of cases, we are still ignoring this critical aspect of our identity store. So why has this happened? Active Directory is old/ancient. If you were to ask me, what I was going to be using, what I was going to be doing as a person, here now, when I first started with Active Directory in 2000, I came out of the NT50 world, kind of looking at what was happening within the identity aspect. Active Directory was new back then, but it hasn't really been replaced by anything as to the level that it has right now. So first of all, when Active Directory was designed, and don't forget, it's kind of an extension of NT, really the technology was mid-90s. This is before the internet boom. It really didn't have this concept that everybody would be interconnected, and it wasn't really cyber resilient from that perspective. One of the main reasons why, and one of the main outcomes of that, is that you can glean a huge amount of information from an Active Directory environment if you have read-only access. Configuration drift, what you configured and put into place in 2002 is not going to be working today in 2023. And as well as probably waves of administrators have come through Active Directory and reconfigured it to the way that they understood the security at that time, means that even if you had locked down very well, let's say you rolled this out in 2002 and spent a lot of time to ensure that it was actually properly configured, it's going to actually drift over time. The other thing is that there's always technical debt. And what we mean by that is that it's very easy to add things to Active Directory, but actually go back and clean it up. It's very infrequent that somebody goes and actually, checks and sees that they close off stuff that they potentially did a number of years ago. So that's it from your side, from your perspective of it. Coming from the outside, the attack tools for Active Directory are extremely sophisticated, and the teams behind them are extremely sophisticated. So if you are taking a kind of a partial approach to this, thinking that you have, kind of a good sense of what those particular risks are, you may be surprised to know just how organized and how sophisticated some of these attack tools are. These folks understand Active Directory top to bottom. And within a lot of organizations, that's no longer true. I wouldn't say that anybody's coming out of computer science school, for example, right now, thinking that they're going to do Active Directory administration. They're looking at Entra ID, Okta, Pingar, other identity opportunities. But definitely Active Directory is still at the forefront, and we don't always have as deep and as rich teams as we require to make sure that Active Directory continues to be supported at the level that it needs to be. Another thing is that Active Directory is incredibly vulnerable. Okay, so from the perspective of, so even though we consider, cybersecurity attacks and things that happen there as well, because it is primarily an on-premise implementation, we have also seen what you call these geocentric challenges. So it is also very susceptible to floods, powers, earthquakes, all these things that are happening, unfortunately, at a more frequent basis as well, it seems. So it is something that not only from a security perspective, but also from a geography perspective. But the other thing is that cyber threats are now network centric, and really location is irrelevant. So if you think about the old days, kind of like a Mission Impossible, somebody having to break into a data center and come down and get to the domain controller, which would have been true in the early days of Active Directory. Those servers were very much protected and not really on anything other than an internal network. Now they have to be. I don't think anybody, unless you're a classified, securely locked down network, those domain controllers are going to be on the internet, and they're going to be found by folks that really put a lot of effort into doing that. So Active Directory is vulnerable on both these sides. It's a physical network, so it's very, very different from, kind of the cloud-centric view we think of sometimes today. But it's also available to anybody who has a network and a computer anywhere in the world, which means that other threat actors, whether they're on their own or government funded, have a rich vein of addresses that they can try to get to and find where those domain controllers are. And as well, the attacks can happen extremely fast. And using some of these automated tools, we've seen Active Directory force crippled in 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 5 minutes gives everybody ample amount of time to actually bring the entire environment down. So it does happen in a extremely quick period of time. And one of the reasons why that happens is because when that final attack occurs, it's usually a culmination of potentially days, weeks, even months sometimes of dwelling in the environment and understanding. So a typical attack doesn't happen where, I finally get to a domain controller and then I upload a script and I run it and boom, I'm done. No, I'm thinking in the aspects, I have to get some money out of these folks. So I need to make sure that I have a foolproof approach that ensures that when I do fire off that encryption, it stays, it's hard, and there's no way for them to undo from that particular situation. So the typical way of getting into an environment, especially Active Directory, is to log in. So the initial effort will be actually trying to do social engineering, phishing. About 50% of that starts from there. Password guessing, just trying to remote desktop into addresses that are in there, trying to go through insecure VPN. I'm going to reconnaissance the environment and get some initial access. Once I have some initial access, I'm going to propagate and see how far I can get into the environment. When I hit a wall, I'm going to work along that wall until I get to a particular point where I can escalate my access so that I'm then an administrator. And then I'm going to put my access throughout the environment. I'm going to make sure that I have malware in everywhere. I'm going to get around traditional backup facilities. I'm going to make sure that everything is set so that when I click on, tap that encryption, that it's so infused and I'm so embedded in the environment that's really hard to get that out. And then I'll sit there for a couple of weeks so that the backups run and other things run and other processes are kind of getting run that I've potentially put into place. Then I'm going to launch the encryption, and then I'm going to let chaos reign and go from there. So this is a very well-known path to getting to that particular state, and it relies on a typical Active Directory configuration, which is not heavily modernized or ready for a cyber resilient world. Not going to go too much on this. I think we've kind of gone on this as well. But basically, when we take a look at all the attacks within the aspects of what breaches that do occur, so when we talked previously, we said that 90% of people think that Active Directory is pivotal to their environment, and 57% said that it would be a severe and catastrophic challenge to their environment. When we actually go back and ask the people that had been breached, where did it start? 90% of them said that it either started or involved Active Directory in the attack. So you have a percentage here, which is huge. This isn't 5% of the story, 10% of the story. 80, 90, 95% of all attacks start or involve Active Directory, and has to be taken into that. And we have to take that into consideration when we're applying our security approach to our overall cyber resiliency within our businesses. The other things is that, Active Directory, a lot of Active Directories kind of, come and go, through a lot of either internal or external processes. And what we do see is that oftentimes during consolidation, everything is kind of maybe, laxed a little bit. So when people are actually moving to a new environment or combining existing environments, the end state tends to be oftentimes a little bit more of an exposed state. And people think about Active Directory consolidations or migrations as actually kind of an operational challenge, but is a huge security challenge as well. And what we're finding as well is that in such situations, attackers are actually seeing that these migrations are occurring and are targeting what they assume will be a slightly less secure Active Directory. And we'll talk a little bit about how we can use migrations to both modernize Active Directory as part of the story of what we're doing, and also ensure that while we're doing that, we're keeping it very secure as well. So we've laid the groundwork of why this is a challenge. So it's the predominant access control system into our businesses. It's the predominant attack vector into people getting to our environments to the point where they're compromised. And in order for us to fight back, we are kind of assuming that Active Directory will continue to have this importance within that particular framework. If we haven't gotten Active Directory out after 23 years, it's not going to take 3 years for it to be completely replaced. It's going to be here in 10, 15 years at a minimum. One of the reasons why, and I do often kind of go down this path a little bit, is that Active Directory, for all that we've talked about today, is an amazing technology. Its ability to be very versatile, to be fault tolerant, to be replicated anywhere and everywhere, to allow you to log in in a lot of different circumstances, low latency, high latency. These are things that are still a little bit unique to Active Directory. So there's a reason to modernize it. So if you're thinking that I'm not going to modernize Active Directory because I'm probably going to get rid of it, you may find that it's actually quite a bit hard to get rid of it over time, and you still have to consider it. So we have to think about Active Directory modernization as a requirement and start getting down the path to doing that. Now, what often happens is that folks do get to that point as well. And there's kind of two drivers behind these migrations that we're doing. So taking a bit of a step back again, one of the things that we're seeing is that even though we try to mitigate, secure, and update existing Active Directory environments, we're finding that they are so insecure and so potentially challenging that oftentimes it's better to migrate to a new secure environment. Oftentimes that happens anyways because folks are doing consolidation, and they may be doing consolidation because they're basically, they've acquired a company, or they've been acquired, or they finally decided to merge multiple forests that they've had over a long period of time. And also there is now a growing set of folks that are actually doing it to modernize their environment because they're saying, basically I need to get to a better environment. And just as it's, sometimes it's easier to tear down a house and build a new one, or, selling your old car for a new car as well. You can fix the problems of an old environment, but oftentimes it's better to go to a new environment. Traditionally, we do a lot of work from an operational perspective, and we do a lot of duplication as we go through it. And when we do it in a more traditional methodology, there's a lot of risks that are involved. There always has been a lot of risks, and we're opening ourselves up to particular challenges during this migration. And when it used to be just a couple, you just kind of load up a couple of servers into a lab and start synchronizing information from one forest to another, that wasn't so much of a risky proposition. But today, now we're migrating this information across these networks and into these particular environments. So we do have to consider, first of all, that these migrations will occur, and then we have to consider that we maybe need a different approach and do it in a more secure, or migrate to a more secure environment. One of the things that we have to think about when we're doing a migration and when we're trying to modernize this particular infrastructure is that there's going to be a number of things that are going to make the migration a little bit more challenging during those particular tasks. If we think about, we're adding ourselves risk to security breaches. If those security breaches happen, we have to pivot almost immediately to be able to go through and do that. We have to consider that compliance frameworks are a lot more complex and have a lot more consequences than they did before. And we have to think about doing a migration in a compliant approach. Not being compliant these days has much bigger penalties and legal consequences than previously. So we also have to consider that while we're modernizing the Active Directory. We have to be really aware that we can't lose data during this particular phase, and we have to ensure that we are actually bringing the data across that we will absolutely need to continue our business continuity. We also have to take into account that there could be significant downtime, and we have to have operational procedures in place to handle that downtime. And finally, we can't overlook the complexity of a migration in the context of an Active Directory migration, and have to sort of take an approach that understands and works within the confines of that complexity framework. So when we actually think hard about modernizing Active Directory, and when we think about what we want to actually do and undertake it, and if part of that story is to migrate to a more secured environment, there are some things to think about that and why we're actually doing that. So all the things that we talked before, so relieving technical debt. If you go back and try to clean up an existing Active Directory environment, first of all, you won't know exactly what's actually in place there. You won't know why those changes necessarily need to be done. And it'll be almost impossible to relieve the technical debt in an existing environment. You're going to reduce risk from cyber threats by moving to a new secure environment, because you're going to be able to configure that environment and understand that there were no previous misconfigurations in place before that. This is also a great opportunity to clean up all the stuff that, maybe we have too many OUs, too many domains, definitely, some of the things that we may have done from an efficiency perspective, GPO structures, things like that will improve efficiency and user experience as well. We're going to be able to protect AD during mergers and acquisitions. So migrations occur all the time because we have these companies or even departments within a company finally doing a merger. And we have to be able to understand that when we do this, we're at a vulnerable state, and we need to get it protected during that. And we need to align with current best practices, by consolidating multi-forest environments. So, one of the other overarching concepts here is that, it's not uncommon for organizations to have multiple forests, not because they wanted multiple forests, but just it's sort of, was what happened, what got inherited, and as well, maybe there was an architecture that made sense for multi-forest in the past, but multi-forest if you have multiple forests that you're trying to manage, it extends that security risk and means you have to always check for individual configurations in every one of those individual forests. And sometimes you even have like multiple domain controllers in the same location for the same people pretty much within that structure. This is all great stuff. And this is all what I think a lot of people have been thinking about doing and undertaking from the perspective of modernizing their Active Directory. But usually it's put off for a number of reasons. The biggest one is that it's time consuming. So if you have already having a challenges staffing your Active Directory administration team, to actually task them with bringing across forests into a single forest perspective, they're going to be challenged to find that time frame. It's all very complex. So, if your traditional methods require that you have huge spreadsheets of project tasks and sort of, go through, things step by step to kind of go through it as well, there's a great lack of automation during a lot of these traditional methods. And traditionally it's been costly. So that's probably another big reason that Active Directory continues to be used so heavily, is that it's in place. You pretty much paid for it, for quite some time. And if you want to actually recreate it, there's a lot of costs involved in recreating this environment, in having the people to manage it during the migration and the modernization side as well. So there are definitely some challenges with traditional methods as well. Whoops. So just kind of finishing off before we kind of pivot into more kind of, how to get around some of these challenges, let's just remind ourselves a little bit of why we're trying to modernize. Active Directory is no longer in the environment that it was previously, and it is a huge target for cyber threats, and the number of cyber threats have been increased and enhanced and become more problematic over time. There's a lot of risk. Therefore, because that cyber threat is more prevalent today than it was before, it has raised risk during mergers and acquisitions, and you have to take the cyber threat into account during those mergers and acquisitions. And as well, we're not at the state that we were previously. There's a lot of improved support options for AD consolidation and migration, both native tools and third-party tools that basically will allow you to undertake these, because I think, by this stage, if you've been in it since the very beginning, you probably have already done a few of these at one level or another. Basically end of life, some domains or some forests, and we've seen the tools steadily increase. And actually, in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, companies have started to pivot back a little bit to Active Directory again because of the cyber threat that has been increasing. And you do see organizations like Semperis, for example, which is just focused 100% on Active Directory and has been at the forefront of that. These organizations are focusing more on Active Directory exactly for that reason, because it is still pivotal to the overall infrastructure. Okay, so we've outlaid a lot of problems. It's also been very scary. The environments are hard to manage. They're susceptible to cyber attacks. But how do we actually solve this problem? So at the beginning, I did talk about the fact that after 23 years, it is still the most prevalent identity store that's out there. It's not going to go away. So one typical solution, which is to get rid of Active Directory, obviously isn't happening because it's almost more entrenched now than it was even 5 years ago. So how do we actually take an approach and be able to do that? So first of all, we have to understand all the pre-existing vulnerabilities in Active Directory. Active Directory has been around for so long that there are vulnerabilities that have been around for 15, 10 years or so, and there's new vulnerabilities that just came out 2 weeks ago. So there's a huge list of vulnerabilities that we have to be aware of, and there is no manual process to actually keep on top of that. We also have years of technical debt So the attack surface of Active Directory, which would be things like stale user accounts, disabled computer accounts, empty security groups. These are things that if I was able to get access, even just with a read-only account on the Active Directory side, I'm going to be able to find these old objects, these old configurations, SMB v1 still running, really old versions of particular protocols and whatnot. And I've never turned off. I'm going to be able to go and grab those. And then because I have made a decision to try and modernize by moving to a more robust infrastructure, I have to understand that this involves a lot of risk from a security perspective. Even though the end stage is definitely worthwhile, I have to sort of be aware of that. So the solution to that is to assess the AD attack source before the migration. So you want to really make sure that you understand how vulnerable the old environment is so that you can close those vulnerabilities as you do the migration, or as you load up the new forest, you actually ensure that it is more secure at the initial state than it was previously. If you don't do anything today, other than if you do one thing, I guess from that perspective, take a look at the MITRE ATT&CK framework. It is a great framework. There's huge amount of effort put in by this organization to document and fully understand all possible vulnerabilities, not just identity, but other vulnerabilities. And if you start to align to that, you'll have a couple of things. One, you'll understand the breadth and the scope of the attack vectors that are out there. You'll be able to continue to educate yourself as well, because the MITRE ATT&CK framework is continually updated. And if you align to it in the sense that if you go through MITRE ATT&CK framework individual items and vulnerabilities, you'll eventually get to a point where your environment is much more cleaner. And you want to also remedy vulnerabilities before migration as well, so that you don't bring one discouraging thing in a lot of these is that they've done the migration, the Active Directory environment has been moved to a new forest, and it turns out that we've just brought over exactly the same challenges that we had previously within our known environment. So first things first, excessive privileges. So, from the perspective of, how often do we actually clean up an environment, before we go and add something else, is very infrequent. So we will always find a lot of accounts and a lot of services and a lot of system accounts that have a lot of privilege rights within Active Directory that they probably don't even need. This increases the attack surface. Every object that has more and more access within it makes the environment more and more susceptible to attack. It also creates an easier privilege escalation for attackers. So once I can find these objects, if there's a lot of them, I'm able to find other objects really quickly and move up there as well. So before we modernize our Active Directory into this new forest, we're going to analyze the attack paths in the source environment. We should identify heavily existing high privileges, remove these privileges from risky accounts pre-migration. Like I say, it's very discouraging to move into a new environment and have the same vulnerabilities still there as well. And start thinking about what these legitimate permission model really should be. So calculate what real privilege accounts you need and apply these security policies post-migration. This is the one chance that you get really to clean up the entire environment when you're doing your consolidation and migration. During the migration itself, you have to start thinking about, kind of modernizing it and ensuring that you're covering off any particular errors or problems. Some folks do kind of like this almost lateral move. They don't have any backup or move back capabilities or thought processes. And oftentimes when you're, looking at a more manual process, you're actually, leading yourself up to opening yourself up to human error. Oftentimes there's a lot of challenges that happen during the migration that we can't foresee, even though we do a lot of pre-planning. And there's a lot of resources that rely on Active Directory that need to be undertaken and understood as part of that before. So one of the approaches that Semperis kind of would suggest is to actually clone the source and destination environments, test the migration before pushing to migrate to production, and having a backup of the Active Directory and having a recovery plan in place, so that you can actually at any time of this consolidation or migration revert back to a previous state, which is trustworthy and is able to work within the context of the environment that you're working with. And then during the migration itself, we also want to ensure that we're understanding that nothing is ever cast in stone. And migrations don't happen in a day. So, continually during that migration, changes will continue to occur to Active Directory, changes will continue to occur to Entra ID. And as well, because sometimes you're breaking, you're kind of breaking the egg and you're doing things that you don't usually do. Oftentimes there's vulnerabilities inadvertently introduced during the migration. So what you want to do as you're migrating is you want to track the changes in the source and destination Active Directory. You want to roll back unintended changes at the attribute level, and as well monitor the Entra ID security configuration. So kind of as you kind of pivot to this new environment, still using the Entra ID tenant, you want to make sure that it is part of the mix as well. So one of the things that I touched upon a little bit at the beginning, but the vast majority of these environments are hybrid as well, and oftentimes people aren't fully aware of the operational security requirements of Entra ID. So we need to go back and take a look at those as well. And then after the time that once the migration is completed, you need to understand about kind of going through and regressing through, or reviewing and ensuring that everything that is in place is in a more protected manner and can actually move forward from the perspective of being a more secure environment. So clean up all those excessive privileges, make sure that you're understanding vulnerabilities and understanding what future cyber threats are. So you have this new environment that's secure at the point that you created it, but you had to move over here because of the challenges and the constraints that you had in your old environment. So what you want to do with this new modern Active Directory is continually monitor for new vulnerabilities, understand that you can roll back changes if required that are from a particular type of attacks, have cyber resilient, malware-free backups, and regularly test an Active Directory recovery process. When we hear about Active Directory outages being days, weeks, months at a time, it's because there wasn't an adequate disaster recovery plan, and there wasn't an adequate approach to ensuring business continuity in the event of a serious cyber breach. So kind of layered the situation here, so just do a short recap, and then we'll talk a little bit about how Semperis can help. So a lot of old, ancient Active Directories out there. A lot of them are beyond repair to the point where it's not really feasible to keep them in their insecure current state. It's no longer the same world as when we first deployed these Active Directories. Cyber threats are becoming more sophisticated, better funded, and understand attack vectors into Active Directory. But even after 23 years, it's still at the forefront of the vast majority of organizations and businesses from an identity perspective. So we have to undertake these things, and we have to undertake this perspective to modernize the Active Directory. So as I mentioned, Semperis is focused on Active Directory and Active Directory only as a core focus. Since Active Directory in essence extends into Entra ID as well, we definitely do it from a hybrid perspective. But we have been at the forefront of this cyber resiliency for many years now, and it has come to a point where we said, you know what, I don't know how much we can do with some of these older Active Directory environments. We need to migrate them to secure environments, and we need to have a proper process for that. So with that in mind, we're introducing Migrator for Active Directory. So this is a product and a process approach that basically looks at that overall modernization concept and basically ensures that in the overall totality of what that's required, we need to make sure that we have a tool that is cyber first from its capabilities. So, when we looked at this space and this market, there are a lot of tools that are from an operational perspective, cyber second or third or even fourth. They're not thinking this as a threat, but as we've seen, it's huge and the impact is considerable. So we look at everything from the perspective of how we develop, of how we secure it, and how we centralize it, and also how we integrate with other Semperis cyber first and cyber resilient products. So when we look at all the products together that Semperis has within this context, there's a complete continuum of using these products towards this security-centric approach to Active Directory migration and consolidation. Two products that I would recommend that folks actually go out and take a look at right now as our community tools. So Purple Knight allows you to fix and find existing security vulnerabilities. So you're able to run this against your Active Directory and your Entra ID with that old Active Directory and find out exactly what it's being vulnerable to. Then you're going to be able to use a product like Forestry, which is also a community tool, to map. So Purple Knight is very much around misconfigurations. Forestry is around object relationships. Find attack paths for particular objects and make sure that you have those well and truly tracked. And then back up your Active Directory forest with Active Directory Forest Recovery, which is a cyber first backup, only backs up the Active Directory and nothing else, and ensures that you then have a copy of your Active Directory from this point forward, so that if you have an attack between the time that you started this project and the migration, or if there's a migration mishap, you can go back to a point in time of your Active Directory as well. So before the migration, you understand how vulnerable your Active Directory is, which might drive you towards thinking about modernizing. You understand all the objects that are out there, and it might show you just how convoluted your permission model is, and again would drive to that modernization. Then you're making a copy of it so that you can maintain business continuity during this initial phase. Then when you're actually starting the migration as well, is that you use Active Directory continually to clone the source and the destination environments, and then put this into actually a lab to test as well. So for example, with Active Directory Forest Recovery, you can back up your existing environment, go in a lab, recover that environment to a lab infrastructure, and then migrate to the target environment, see what happens. Learn from that, go back and try again, and so forth and so forth as you go through that. Directory Services Protector is an active protective layer around Active Directory that will tell you exactly what is changing within the Active Directory. So if you are looking at changes as things come into the new target environment, you get an absolute sense of what's being created, and you can improve things in stream during the migration as well. Using our new Migrator for Active Directory, you can actually synchronize directories and migrate the objects between the two environments in this secure manner and in this way that you're protected as well. Once you've done a post-migration, you want to actually go through it and clean things up. So remove SID history. You don't need it anymore with the old environment being retired. Look at domains that you don't need. Consolidate OUs and basically put in place this protective layer on top of that. Continually monitor new environments with DSP to sort of keep it within that. So DSP modernizes Active Directory from a day-to-day operational aspect and keeps it running from that perspective. And then use Active Directory Forest Recovery to continue to have these cyber first backups of your Active Directory environment and recover them directly into either an existing environment or more importantly, in some sense, a new disaster recovery centric environment. A little bit about why work on with Semperis. So arguably, we have the deepest level of Microsoft experience on Active Directory, 100 plus years of MVP experience. Go to LinkedIn, just look at all the folks that work with us, or from our CTO, Guy Terzovsky, Darren Morelia, who's our product vice product manager of product management, up from the GPO side, Gil Kirkpatrick, all kinds of folks, kind of are driving the direction and the aspects of this. And really, from the perspective of where we come from, we are heavily invested in making Active Directory be better than it is today, to the point where we are now putting out into the market community tools like Purple Knight, which basically will give anybody a really quick security assessment of their Active Directory, and Forestry, which takes concepts like understanding attack paths, whether we use traditional Bloodhound approach or something like that, to a more user-friendly approach. And then as well, we lead through conferences and podcasts as well. So if you look at our hybrid identity protection conferences and podcasts, you can educate yourselves. We are still thinking and breathing Active Directory every day as well, from the aspect of our core DNA of the organization. All right, so hopefully that's given you a good sense of the risks involved right now, the challenges with Active Directory, how to modernize it to migrating to a new secure environment, the challenges of that, and how to apply processes and products to that as well. So with that, I'll hand it back to Annie for questions, or for finishing up the formal part of the presentation.
Yeah, great presentation, Doug. We did get a few questions from the audience, and just a reminder, you guys can still get those questions in on your console, and I guess we'll hop right into it. We got a question from Lynn here. What are the key challenges or pain points that organizations typically encounter with legacy Active Directory environments?
So probably the biggest one is that there are a lot of older either approaches or configurations that were very prevalent within the context of Active Directory, kind of back in the day, pretty much whenever this kind of got started. So I think the list is very long, and actually Purple Knight is a great opportunity to go through them. So it could be things like people not using MFA, having older versions of protocols running, not really tracking significant changes to that from that perspective. Things along that particular path. Basically, there are a completely new, if you took a look at best practices for Active Directory in 2005 and best practices today, completely different approach on both sides. So you have to go back and take a look at that configuration drift that's occurred as you kind of go into these new models from that perspective. Probably too many to put into an exact list, but there are over 160 individual tests in Purple Knight, of which 120 or so are on the Active Directory side and 40 on the Entra ID side, which will test for this configuration drift and see if you are still using some of those older configurations.
Great. And what type of migrations does Semperis Migrator for AD currently support?
So it supports pretty much local AD to local AD migration. So, even with or without SID history. So basically any forest that has, kind of a more traditional model, to it, will be supported. And definitely, I don't think there's a lot of challenges, for kind of more of the traditional Active Directory implementations. So it supports pretty much, every instance of the schemas. You can combine and sync the schemas up, for example, and pretty much as long as it's a local Active Directory implementation, it'll be supported.
Okay, great. And the questions are pouring in. I'll start with Douglas's here. Is moving to Entra ID an environment not completely under the organization's control recommended over on-premises AD? Or is a non-MS directory service recommended to avoid attack familiarity? It's a top question there if you need to reread that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So for some reason, they're not showing up in mine anymore. So I'm not seeing the questions anymore, but can you read that out again just one more time? I'll just sort of.
Yeah, Doug, if you click on that inbox, you should be able to see it maybe on that left-hand side of the Q&A box, but I'll reread it to you anyway. Is moving to Entra ID an environment? Is moving
here it is.
to
I do get it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
I'll reread it anyway for the audience.
Yeah.
Here we go. So is moving to Entra ID an environment not completely under the organization's control recommended over on-premises AD? Or is a non-MS directory service recommended to avoid attack familiarity?
So that's almost a philosophical question, you know. So from the perspective of there's pros and cons. So for example, Okta, you know, is probably the most traditional non-Microsoft identity service that's out there, and it is kind of, that's one of the drivers behind it, is that, you know, it's outside of the overall Microsoft ecosystem, so it's kind of out there as well. But even Okta spends a minute amount of what Microsoft is doing on Entra ID right now. So if you look at the depth of the tools, I usually say that it's still a better extension of your environment into a hybrid because of things like Microsoft Defender, because of their ability to close off vulnerabilities across all of their tenants almost immediately once they get in there, and the depth, and also aligning it with other traditional Azure services as well. But I think there's also a good opportunity to maybe include Okta in your environment as well. But it's more, like I said, more of a philosophical issue. So, okay.
Great. And what is Semperis's involvement with GPOs in the AD environment?
We love GPOs. So, you know, Darren Morelli is basically the GPO guy. So, you know, so there's two things. One is the impact of GPOs is often misunderstood. Misconfigurations in GPOs have huge downstream capability consequences, and also they're a huge target in the cybersecurity. If I can get to a GPO and turn off desktop controls and software deployment, stuff like that, it's huge, right? So it's an area that we take very seriously. So, you know, we test some GPO attack vectors in Purple Knight. We also have some GPO-centric features in Directory Services Protector, history of GPO changes, comparison of GPO changes, rollback of GPO changes. So it is very much at the forefront of what we think about. And actually, you know, I think we consider GPOs probably more importantly than maybe some other folks do. But yeah, it's very much part of our DNA in the products as well.
Okay, great. And how can someone learn more about Semperis Migrator for AD?
So the best thing to do would be to reach out and contact us directly at smad@semperis.com. So Semperis Migrator for Active Directory, smad@semperis.com. And that will go right to our team, and they'll respond back. This is new because we introduced it, but it's actually been in gestation for quite some time, and we've actually, worked with a number of customers as well towards this direction. That team really would love to hear from folks and give you more feedback on our approach and more around the technical drivers of that approach.
Okay, great. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Thank you, Doug, for being with us today. And thank you to the audience for attending today's webcast, sponsored by Semperis and presented by Redmond Mag. Don't forget to check out those resources on your console, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.